Steve Holmberg, welcome back to Second Nature.
Aaron Lutzy, good to be back.
A lot of people are coming off a pretty big performance at Western States right now, but you and I are coming off of big performances at TrailCon.
True, true. Not as long or as hard. But
You
it was
know,
good. Did you watch Western States?
a little bit. I check in every now and then. I'll hit the Twitter feed. I checked in on the live stream as well. Obviously to check in on Dylan and Corinne more than anything. But man, it's so amazing to see a live stream. Like I think when I turned it on, there was 25,000 people watching it live. Like
Yeah,
that's crazy.
25 to 30,000 people, I think is what Dylan said. It's amazing to see that many people tuning in for a trail running race.
Yeah.
It's definitely, the sport has changed when that's happening.
Well, and the thing that you have to also bear in mind is that that's concurrent. So, just like I don't know how you watched it, but I popped in at different points. If you really add up how many people actually tuned in and then jump back out and then tune in later or whatever, I mean, I bet that number is dramatically higher than 30,000 individual viewers,
Yeah,
too.
exactly.
Pretty
Yeah, and
cool.
good on Dylan and Corinne for they did their ultra marathon of reporting everything that's happening. They were on for a long time.
I sent Dylan a message on Sunday. I was like, "You made it! Not only Broken Arrow, TrailCon, Western States, and then just like in between all those things, just being Dylan Bowman at an event with like lots and lots of people there who all want a second of your time or to tell you about something or to do whatever. I mean, that in its own is a lot of energy that goes into those moments too, and to always be on and to always be thinking about stuff and being engaged, like that's a long stretch of I think it was like 10 days of just like full blast. I guarantee he's taking a big nap right now.
I hope he's not listening to this for another week.
Oh no, it was a pretty cool week in Tahoe, and what I'd love to do today on the pod is have you. I know you did a lot of preparation for the TrailCon panel that you presented at, and one of the things that I saw that you put together is this state of trail running doc, and I think you did sort of an abbreviated version of this, and you hit on some of the points during your speech. But I'd love to just dig in and just have a chat through some of these things and maybe ask some questions and dig in a little bit deeper. I think that's one of the things that we didn't get enough time to do at TrailCon was just ask questions and kind of push the presenters on stuff. We're trying hard to get through lots and lots of information in our time on stage. So now we've got the microphone, we've got plenty of time.
Time.
Let's
All right, buckle
let's
up, everybody.
yeah, yeah.
Here we
I
go.
mean, and for the listeners who aren't familiar, Steve, give us just a little bit of give us a little insight on your background. Talk about Insight Accelerator, like what the qualifications for why you're telling us all this stuff.
Yeah, sure. So I a bit of my background, I spent 17 years at Nike. I've been in strategy, brand, and consumer research and marketplace research. And um, I love that experience there, and having each of those roles is sort of help bring together understanding what's happening with consumers and what's happening from the industry in order to help understand what trends exist, and in order to be able to identify where sports are going and how to better connect and build product for consumers in the future. And that's really what Insight Accelerator does, is it helps different companies understand who the consumer is in order to help build better product for them in the future. And so with that as a little bit of background, we had the opportunity to open up in day number one, David Callahan and Rob and myself, to talk about what are we seeing from a trail running perspective. And there we were only talk about five. I've got nine here that we're going to touch at a very high level. We could definitely spend hours and hours going deeper into all of these, but I just wanted to walk through a few of the ones that stood out to me that are different and where we think potentially trail running is going and things that people should be aware of sort of in the future. And some of these are guesses and informed guesses, and some of these are pretty good hypotheses. So I'm interested to have a conversation about it.
I think it's really fun to be able to have these conversations with all the other background that we have access to as well. We've seen in so many other scenarios some of these trends that you're looking at here in trail running play out across other sports like gravel racing, like mountain biking, like track and field. I mean, there's so many different things that we could, look ahead to the future of what other sports have already gone through. even surfing in certain cases. There's so many other examples of industries that have gone through it, and we can use that as sort of our roadmap to know what to do and what to avoid in certain scenarios too. Before you get started, I have to give you complete credit because I have lifted your framework for so many things at this point. The how might we framework, and I think an extension of that is like what would need to be true if dot dot dot. I have used those almost daily and including on stage at TrailCon. So thanks for that.
You're
Credit
welcome.
credit where credit's due.
Yeah, that
Um,
came up in the last podcast. Yeah, check it out if you're interested in what the how might we is and how it can help you on the day to day.
yeah, I'll link our previous pod in the show notes so that because that one I think was really like an insights 101, and that was the intention behind that one. This is more of like a here's where we are right now. That one is sort of like how to think about things, how to look at things through the lens of insights, and how to really, yeah, just have the right framework to work from. So I'll make sure that shows up in the show notes. But without further ado, let's drop into these trends, the state of trail running.
All right, let's talk about the state of trail running. So I have sort of an overarching of 9 different trends in trail running that we should be watching as we sort of proceed in the future. And some of these come out of TrailCon, but a lot of these have sort of been existing throughout this year as we evolve. And something I really like doing is setting up a level set of where are we in terms of participation. So, how are consumers engaging with the sport? And what we're seeing is trail running is growing and it's growing really nicely, approximately 8% average annual growth rate over the last 5 years. So, it's got this nice steady level. Compare that, interestingly, to running. Aaron, if you were to make a guess, how much is running growing at the moment?
Gosh, I've got to imagine it's got to be flat or extremely slow moving.
Yeah, it's
Yeah.
actually flat. Good for you.
Oh, sweet.
There's a lot of news about it in the media, and everybody's talks about it growing, and we're having this boom. But in terms of participation, we're not seeing that boom happening. And if I'm going to digress already to talk just quickly about why that's happening, because I think it's really interesting to unpack that. We see it a lot in the media, I think, because we're getting a lot of run clubs starting. And the media always had a hard time pointing to a solo runner out on the road and saying, hey, this is running culture, etc. But now that everybody's getting together and they're in these run clubs, they're able to see that, oh, you know what? This is a community of people that I can now point to and identify what are their values, etc. And so I think the media is sort of that's resonating with them. Additionally, the market size is increasing. So the sales of running product is increasing, but it's largely because of the average selling price of road product is on the rise, but units are down. And that units down is actually this really nice connection to that sport participation. And so while they're pretty flat over the last 5 years in terms of that participation in road running, trail running is growing at that healthy 8%. The other interesting thing to call out on this is that casual growth is happening at 8% or at 9%. So that's people that are running less than 25 times per year. That's growing at 9%. And those that are running more than 25 times per year, that's growing at almost 4%. And so you've got this sort of good evolution of people moving up the funnel into more core activities, which is, again, another sign of it, that trail is actually very healthy from a participation perspective.
I was curious about the graduation of road runners to trail runners, but when you talk about the difference between casual and core, it'd be my assumption that if you were a road runner and you were graduating to trail, you'd probably drop into the core category almost instantly, just given the frequency of running, right? I feel like a road runner is someone who's out quite a bit. What do you think?
Potentially, it's interesting. I think there are a lot of people that are trail curious, and they're road runners. They're sort of committed to the road, and then they see trail, and they're like, "Oh, I will try that." And so they kind of pop in and dabble in it. But you do bring up this interesting the hypothesis that we have is that not many people go from couch to trail running, in my opinion. What you tend to find is people will move from couch to road running for some reason. And then as they become more fluent in it and start racing at, let's say, half marathon or marathon levels, they start to look for something different. And then they start to move across into the trail running side of things to have a different type of experience. I recently saw this with my sister-in-law, who she's an avid road runner, and then she was inspired by a half marathon on the trail, and so she dabbled in a little bit and started to move across, and now is sort of very much increasing her engagement on the trail, which is pretty good.
You know what I think is kind of funny is I feel like there are sort of accepted and known times for like what's a good marathon time. And everyone knows like, oh, I got a sub 4, then like, oh, okay, like whatever. But when it comes to trail running, there's nobody has the same vocabulary because, well, was there elevation in there? What was the terrain like? So much is different that you can be like, oh, I ran a 50K, I ran a 50 miler. And it's the first question can't be, what was your time? I mean, it can be, but like you can't get judged on your time in a trail race the way that you can in a road race. And I think there's something really interesting there. Maybe that ties into sort of the culture of trail running versus the culture of road running. But that was always something that I really loved when I was doing lots of 50Ks and 50 milers is that I could say whatever number I wanted and no one would know if that was good or not. And honestly, in the handful of 50 milers I did, the times were way different because one of them had tons of elevation and one of them was essentially flat. So yeah, I think that's also one of the things. There's less judgment.
Yes, absolutely. And that's judgment is an interesting thing as you grow older. And so, when you're younger, like if it's all about racing on the road and it's about time, then there's a period there that you're getting faster, but then there's a period you start to get slower and you start to look for different things. If you can no longer be competitive on that landscape, how do you change your perspective? And I think that's people are searching for trail for that adventure, that thing that they can have an experience of and share with other people that isn't necessarily feeling necessarily judged by having a certain time, like I'm either good or I'm slow or whatnot. This is just, hey, I'm a trail runner and I'm out there for the adventure, and I think people respect that.
We talked a little bit about the congruency to other sports, and I feel like mountain biking is very similar in that. Like, I don't know anybody really that races, well, okay, I know a handful of people that race cross country mountain bikes, but honestly, like, of the friends that I have that ride mountain bikes and ride mountain bikes with me, hardly any of them actually race. We all just go out to have fun and we ride multiple times per week, but we don't, we're not basing it off of like training for a race or getting ready for a race. And I wonder if maybe that's also sort of something that comes along with the trail running scene.
Yes, I think as the trail running scene matures as well, it very much has that evolution of different types of running that they can do. People can be going for time and speed, but it could also be about endurance or altitude challenges or FKTs. There's a lot that's in there that people are starting to play with, and I think that's going to start to diversify the sport of what people are doing and what people specialize in, just like mountain biking.
Very cool.
Yeah. All right. The last point here on participation is the good news is it's also accelerating in terms of participation. So the current year numbers are higher than sort of the average over the last five. So it is becoming bigger. But the good news is it's also not like 25% growth, right? Like this may not be a flash in the pan. It's a nice growth trajectory that everybody's on.
Cool.
And so when we start to think about it, the next question that always kind of comes up is, all right, trail races. Like, what are we thinking here? And I think there's a really interesting moment that we're having in trail running where there continues to be this tent poling effect where people are going to continue to try to go longer and longer and longer. And so that is going to be a nice sharp point for people to grasp onto as this is trail running and this is extreme and hard. But at the same time, I think you're going to see people move into sort of harder terrain and new formats. And that's where really you're going to see more of the growth actually happen. There are only a handful of people that do Cocodona. It's not like that's going to move the needle in terms of total participation in racing. where you actually may get all of these new people coming across, let's say from road into the rest of it. And you see more of that middle distance growth, which I'll call, let's say, half marathon to 50K. And when people graduate out of the road, they'll sort of move into that space. So I think that's going to be a really nice place for everybody to grow.
One thing that's I've seen over the last decade or so too is that when I came into the sport of trail running, it wasn't called trail running, it was ultra running. And there was this big focus on 50K, 50 mile, 100 mile. And not that there weren't shorter races, but you sort of identified as an ultra runner. And now you rarely see anybody take on that title of ultra runner. You hear them talk about themselves as trail runner. It's really interesting to see people kind of adapt a different title to make it almost a little bit more accessible. Any
Yes.
thoughts on that?
Um, it's I think there's always been a very interesting question when you talk to consumers and ask them, are you a runner? And a lot of people say no, I am not a runner, even though they're running 5 days a week. And I think it's hard for people to associate with sort of the elite side of, especially on the road running side. And I think there's kind of that same concept that you were talking about for ultra, is that people may not associate themselves with that ultra side of things. And so it's a little bit more palpable or attainable to be just a trail runner. And that's okay, right? The ultra is really the pinnacle, it is considered a pinnacle of the sport. And people can be part of it by being a trail runner, but not necessarily in that full space of the ultra side of things.
I feel like there's a great opportunity. I mentioned this a couple other times, but there's a great opportunity because ultra is literally anything longer than a marathon. And I think there'd be a great opportunity to pull people into the sport that way by showing up at a marathon finish line and then setting up a booth like 100 feet past it and handing out medals for like, oh, I
Yeah.
actually completed an ultra marathon. Y just because then once you have that title, you're like, "Oh, I guess I do this now.
Yeah. I
I'm gonna
can
go
do it.
look I can go look for the next ultra marathon and, wow, what's a couple more miles? I'll run a 50K, that's like 4 miles more less than 4 miles, uh, what I just ran, like, I guess I could do that." Like, that'd be such an interesting gateway and such a tricky way to pull people in, but I definitely feel like once you've crossed the threshold of like, "Oh, I'm an ultra runner now," you're starting to look for those opportunities in the same
Yeah,
way. I don't know.
exactly. Somebody should steal that. That's a great idea.
I'm waiting. Free ideas over here.
Yeah. And speaking of those types of races, I do think there's going to be more of a festival nature that we're going to start to see. If I look at Broken Arrow being an example of where are those opportunities for everybody to come together and celebrate the culture. We saw the great success of that that was happening there. And I think you're going to see more of that as an opportunity to be part of the culture and community. Same thing with TrailCon, everybody coming in and feeling like they're part of it.
Yeah. Somebody said in a conversation that I was having at TrailCon, they said, "I feel like I'm at a trail runner's wedding right now." Because everybody from the industry, from both the, brand side of things as well as the athlete, they were all at that one party, and everywhere you looked, you'd see familiar faces from, all the industry together. That to me was something that was really special. I I don't think I've seen that in a lot of other sports where you've got pretty much everybody from the industry, both athletes and brands, all connected in the same place, hanging out and having a great time. That to me really stood out. I was thinking to myself, like, I don't know, maybe a World Cup is the closest I've ever been
I go
to.
sea otter. I think sea otter is
Yeah,
probably the closest equivalent where there are races. They just happen to flank TrailCon,
right.
but it brings everybody together in that capacity. Again, mountain biking being a good leading indicator for the sport.
Yeah.
I think that's a nice opportunity there. Yeah.
But at Sea Otter, you're connected with everybody in the expo where the brands are trying to show stuff off and the consumers are walking through. I guess what I meant is more of like, where is everybody gathering together and having that moment where they're sort of breaking bread? I feel like that's what happened at TrailCon that was really cool that I haven't seen necessarily. Maybe at like a movie premiere or something for mountain biking is the closest I've ever really seen it be on that level. There's other things like I think it's called like the Bicycle Leadership Conference or stuff like that. But I don't know. I just feel like I haven't seen that yet. And I thought that was something that I took away as something that was really special about being there.
Yeah, and we're coming out of a big month with um, Outside Fest, Switchback, OR, and I think a lot of these brands are trying to, or organizations are trying to bring that back, that old school OR where 26,000 people showed up, and it was work, but it was also a party and a get together, and I think TrailCon felt very different than those. It felt like it had that sort of gathering that we've all kind of wanted and needed, especially because a lot of times the thing that you talk about trail happens at TRE, the running event, but trail's always the second story. It's not the first story. Everybody's there really for the road running shoes. It's the vast majority of what you see there. So this was an opportunity for everybody to come together that is passionate about trail first, which was nice.
Very cool.
Yeah. Um, all right, let's go on to number three. Let's talk about athletes. I think the big thing for me that I expect to see over the next couple of months is um, really, is there the opportunity for pros to start to move into trail? That's the interesting um, tension that lies, because we're starting to see races have bigger and bigger purses, and people are able to make more money if they're podium. Wait for it, podiuming. And there we
There
go.
you go.
And so I wonder, like Des Linden, who's starting to move into more of that ultra space, are we going to see potentially pros in the road world move across? And you see it sometimes with steeplechasers. They're the kind of the first group to come. But that's something we might see as we start to mature a bit.
Absolutely. And I feel like people maybe getting burned out on their original sport, but noticing that they could jump in, slot in, and start showing up on the podium almost immediately. Um, you mentioned Des Linden. I think there's, a very, very clear line of what happened in gravel racing too, where all these road racers where they couldn't even get a look for the pro circuit over in Europe, but then they could show up and, off the couch win a gravel race here. That window is starting to close a little bit, but yeah, could this be a sweet spot? Same thing happened in mountain biking. BMXers who for years had been doing really gnarly tricks on little bikes realized that they could hop on a big mountain bike and do the same tricks that they've been doing for years because those tricks hadn't necessarily even been invented on mountain bikes yet. And automatically podium. I mean, Darren Bearclaw is a perfect example of exactly that. BMX legend decided that he was going to pick up a mountain bike, and then all of a sudden he's the most famous and iconic mountain biker of his generation. So it's definitely happened in other sports. It's almost certainly going to happen here.
Yeah, I
And
agree.
some triathletes, our buddy Eric Lagersham's showing up at some races now. Heather Jackson, is a huge crossover as well. So yeah, it's already happening, which is pretty exciting. And I think what's going to be interesting too is what else they bring with. So surely they have a level of skill, understanding fueling, nutrition, but like what else are they bringing with them? Because I don't think any of these athletes are just coming to trail running to like take anything necessarily. What are the best practices that they have for race preparation, for content creation, for projects, for just introducing new ideas into the sport of trail running? I'll be fascinated to see how that side of things plays out too.
Yeah, and how it inspires everybody. I think my next one is culture here. Yeah, I think that's actually a really great segue to culture, where um, these new people that come into the sport, whether it's the pros or the elites or anyone else that's new to trail running, there's this sort of tension that I heard throughout TrailCon of people worried about that changing the culture of the sport, and it no longer being relevant to what it currently is. And there's a tension as things grow, as always, that may happen. But I think people are, at least everybody that I've talked to at TrailCon, etc. Everybody wants to be part of the trail community. They don't necessarily want to be the road community in trail. And so I think there's going to be more assimilation than there is opportunity to differentiate there. And so I think that's the interesting tension that's going to lie on that culture side. Over the next couple months to years.
I asked this question on my panel with the athletes from the different sports. I said one of the things that we all identify with is this thing that we want other people to love the thing that we love, and we want people to come into our sport and enjoy it and love it as much as we do. But then what happens if that actually works? And now all of a sudden, you've got a lot of people from outside of the sport that are coming into your sport. I think another interesting example too is what's happening with Warner Brothers Discovery coming in and starting to, you know, publicize and capture a lot of these races. And I think you have this sort of like interesting approach to the whole thing where, yeah, being on Discovery legitimizes in a way what you're doing, but also having them take over and be responsible for showing your sport. Like, do you get what you actually want out of that thing? Yes, you're going to get the live stream, but do you get the yeah, those unspoken rules. You get people showing up to races that don't know what they're doing, and they've only seen it on, Discovery. They haven't come up through, watching YouTube videos of Gary Robbins on Ginger Runner and listening to Free Trail and whatever. They've only seen it on TV, and then they show up horrifically underprepared for Cocodona or something like that.
Yeah.
um, like these big so-called levers that we think are going to play a huge role in the expansion of the sport may end up creating more problems than it's worth in certain cases. Or we might be going down this path, but also it's not giving us the result that we actually want. Like, do we need 1 million people to watch a race on TV, or do we need more people to be part of the culture? Yeah, I don't know. I think there's a lot of questions that trail running is going to have to ask itself, and hopefully and really just reckon with over the next couple of years.
Yeah, I'm interested to see how they end up bringing that to life. I keep going back to one of the inspirational things that I saw growing up was watching Iron Man. And it would come on one time per year and it would be on for 2 hours and it showed the race during that time. But part of it was also sharing people's stories, and it may be front of packers and it may be back of packers, but it showed you those stories and helped define what that culture was. That there's a spectrum of people who participate, and this is what they like and believe about the sport. And so there was some interesting education that happened at the same time with that helped you feel integrated. And I can kind of see the same thing happening with the Golden Trail series and how it's published on TV. Is if we can start to tell those athlete stories, both again front of pack and back of pack, that will help show what culture is like and actually draw people in more than probably exclude people out or make people want to change it.
Mm. Net positive, I think, being able to tell the stories of the culture as long as they focus on that. I think I definitely have a chip on my shoulder because in mountain biking, we had a free product that was really high production quality, and it was replaced with an expensive product with a lower production quality. And I think that really frustrated basically every single mountain biker on the planet. Whereas trail running, there's not really a gold standard at this point that's on that Red Bull level of production. There is great content being put out, but it's really reliant on the commentators, reliant on the events themselves to put that together. And I think a lot of people really love that. What would a higher production quality actually bring to that experience? Maybe additional storytelling, maybe deeper stories being told, or just the straight up quantity of it. I think the Golden Trail World Series does something interesting for the growth of the sport, but I think, they are going to have their lane, and that's great. And then the rest of the events and athletes and projects and brands are also going to have their work that they need to do. And I think it's okay if, like, you don't just apply that to everything. Um, in the heyday of mountain biking in the 90s, there was a car company sponsoring every single mountain bike team. And I feel like since that went away, everybody's been trying to get a car sponsor, and they've been so focused thinking that, like, if the car sponsors come back to mountain biking, it's going to solve everything. And I think that's obviously not true. And so I think in the same way, exposure is not going to be the single lever that like fixes everything in trail running and sets it on this mega growth path that's going to, make everything okay. I think you have to keep doing all the stuff that's right for the scene, right for the culture. And then if you get these extra wins like the Olympics or Warner Brothers or whatever, then that's a nice to have, but it's not going to define the sport.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Let's move on to the media. Speaking of which, I think we've talked about this in our 2025 sort of predictions
Mm.
of just the general outdoor space. The main thing here is I think, we're seeing some challenges with outside and how they're sort of coming into play. And you've got, it moving, trail running moving to TV. But the things that sort of stand out to me are really that I think athletes will continue to become media engines. I think Dylan's is a great example of that. I think there's a little switch that's happening here, and I'm going to see if I can say this properly. But there's going to be a switch of athletes through a brand lens switching to brands through the athlete lens. And this was a big sort of conversation that came up to me in TrailCon, where people want to have a voice, and they are the ones who are connected with consumers oftentimes better than the brands themselves are in, let's say, social media. And coming out of Trappy and Corinne and Dylan's podcast, where they talked about who are the sort of the bigger influencers or style leaders within trail running, the Corinne had a great point about how many of these athletes are required to wear the team kit when they run, but that has very little opportunity for self-expression in it. And I think what we're going to see is a little bit of that switch of how brands are going to give athletes a little bit more of that opportunity to self-express in what they're wearing, how they're sort of showing up in social media. And I think that's going to change that narrative a bit. So less just do it. All athletes are plugging through a just do it narrative to the athlete is telling their story and they bring out what does just do it mean for them. That's kind of the juxtaposition there.
One of the things that I love to talk to brands about is like, what does it mean to be an athlete to represent this partner? What does it mean to be a Red Bull athlete? What does it mean to the athlete themselves and how do they communicate that out? That's the most important thing. They are not just a repeater of your signal as a brand. They are telling their story and you need to fit into that and help and equip them with like how to tell the story of what it means to be a Red Bull athlete in this case. I also think one of the biggest struggles that we're going to have in the next couple years is definitions. Because right now it's sort of this binary, you're an athlete or you're an influencer, but there's not really I just think it's more of a spectrum than anything else, right? There are people who are hyper competitive athletes that are winning stuff, and there are people that are all the way on the other side who are, just plugging whatever product. But there's a lot of people in the middle. I count myself in there. I guess, am I a creator? Well, what does that mean? Creator sounds kind of like influencer. It's like, well, I'm not necessarily a coach, but like I'm making a lot of content that's very useful for, 100,000 plus people, but I'm also not racing. So what is, I guess that makes me an influencer. So I think we need to do a better job of agreeing on a definition of someone who is incredibly useful in the sport, but also is creating content without just saying content creator because that's too big of a bucket. And I think that brands are having a really hard time understanding this. Like you and I were joking at dinner at the first night of TrailCon, is that this conversation with sponsorship feels a lot like Go Fish right now, where it's like, I got a big influence on, or I've got a big following on Instagram. I've got a YouTube channel where I talk long form content. I've got a newsletter. But I think that the reason why I'm having that Go Fish problem is that the brands have a bucket for athletes and they have a bucket for basically Instagram influencers, and I'm neither. But I would say that I probably have more credibility than the influencer. I may not have the audience of a mega influencer, but I do feel like there's something really valuable there. But the brands are having a really difficult time identifying A, the value, and B, the resources to support that kind of creator, athlete creator. And so, what do you do with somebody who has a ton of value but isn't on a podium, but also isn't just like shilling a different product every week? That's what I think all sports need to really figure out. Like, what do we do with that person? Because probably that's going to move the needle more than either side. I don't
Yeah.
know.
And I think there's you bring that up too of the the definition, etc. And having that spectrum, I it's going to be interesting to see. The one place that I think there could be some interesting pushback are those influencers that are not part of the sport that try to enter the sport,
Mm.
and try to bring their influence and their perspective without, let's say, earning their stripes. That I think that may not be received so well by the trail running community. That may be, there's an authenticity there that they kind of struggle with, where other creators are talking, have that authenticity, like they're running the races or they're out on the trail all the time. And it's something I would love to have that conversation at some point of, let's talk to pro athletes and sort of more of those creator influencers, and is there a tension that's there of where brands are focusing their dollars at the end of the day and their energy, and how do pro athletes feel and how do influencers feel and how do we all work together? I think could be another good topic for next year for TrailCon.
When the sport was identified as ultra running, the bar was a lot higher. You had to finish at least a 50K race to be even remotely credible or to consider yourself part of the sport. Now that it's trail running, you could run on a trail for 500 feet and technically be a
You're a
trail
trail
runner.
runner, yeah.
Maybe we go back to ultra running. I don't know.
Yeah.
You kn One other thing, I'm looking at your slide here, and if anybody's listening to this on the podcast, the YouTube version of this podcast is gonna have all of the slides on there. Sorry, Brett, for making you go through this extra edit step, but here we are. One of the things you talked about in this slide is that TV will draw consumers to the sport. One of the other things that I think in specific with this athlete creator is that not only are these athlete creators poised to benefit from the growth of the sport, benefit from additional eyeballs on it, additional brands, additional media, but when these media properties are created, they're going to be looking at these athlete creators as number one on the list for commentators, for people to be involved. And so as somebody who is potentially out there as an athlete creator getting their start, understand that the opportunity might not just be to build a YouTube channel or a podcast or a Instagram following. It might actually end up with a microphone in your hand on TV for the Olympics or for Golden Trail World Series or whatever else, because you are that credible voice. You do have audience that cares about your opinion, and, like if trail running ends up in the Olympics, I think Dylan's probably top of the list for people. Dylan and Corinne would be my first two choices.
Yeah, who you
To,
want to listen to.
you know, and it's because they put in the reps, they built the credibility, they've done it. They're a known quantity. Uh, NBC is going to be looking for exactly that when the Olympics come around for trail running. They're going to be looking for those credible voices that have the experience, that have done the work. And I think all these other athlete creators that are developing that strength are going to be in a really good position. They're sort of skating to the puck, as it were, which I think is also something that no one's really talking about just yet.
Yeah. And speaking of skating to the puck, I think that's the other side or flip side of creator, is that I think we're going to start to see these athletes become brands. And watching Killian come in third place at Western States with his brand Normal, wearing shoes that everybody else can buy, is a good testament to that. But I think you're going to see more people coming potentially to the line with their own products, especially as the landscapes becomes more crowded with brands in the future.
Absolutely. It's a huge lever for anybody to be able to pull if they're able to actually represent their own stuff on the start line, right? Or in the scene at all. I think, yeah, that credibility just comes along with it. And absolutely.
Yeah. All right. Let's move on to six. Just generally at a real high level, we continue to see athletes move into brands. I think, Corinne being a good example of that. And as they move into brands, they're just really helpful authenticators of the sport and help people that really understand, let's say, product or merchandising or marketing, really ground themselves in what that direction is. So I think you're going to see more athletes become employees that help steer the teams in the right directions.
I had a really fun conversation. That was actually the first time I met Corinne, was this
Oh,
past week
me
in
too.
real life.
Yeah.
That was the best part about TrailCon. I just got to see everybody in person for the first time.
Yeah.
But, she's working at Hoka now, and we were talking about sort of the experience of being on the other side of these conversations of, now you know enough to be dangerous. You understand, like, in the past, you were probably asking somebody for this, or somebody was asking you for this, and you didn't have the context of the discussion within everything else that was going on inside the brand. And now that you're at the brand, you're privy to a lot more discussions, a lot more of the process. And so you can actually more, in some cases, more accurately help somebody out, or more accurately pull somebody up to speed on a way of working that would be more effective in certain cases. I don't want to put Corinne on the spot because I don't want everybody to blow her up, but I feel like all of us who have worked at brands understand that there's like a different way of doing it. And I'm working on this course right now. It's about athlete sponsorship, and the whole focus of it is, as an athlete, you don't understand the conversation that happens at the brand after you make contact and pitch them. You don't understand how that goes through. It's not one person's decision, hardly ever. But if you understand what that conversation looks like, you can develop tools to manage that conversation and better support your case.
That's awesome.
And I think that that goes for just about everything: athletes, content, events, you name it. The more you know about how things operate inside a brand, the more dangerous you can be when it comes to pitching those projects in. And I think, to your point of athletes becoming employees, the relationships that we have as athletes throughout the sport, what we learn is going to resonate back out into the sport. And so these athletes that are tight knit with lots and lots of other athletes, being able to share their experience out is going to help like a huge swath of other athletes raise their game when it comes to pitching partnerships, pitching projects, media, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It's going to raise the game of everybody, whether they're at the brand or not. I think sort of the echo of athletes becoming employees can be really interesting.
Yeah, when they uh, pull the curtain back and you get to see the behind the scenes, yeah, it's going to be pretty revealing.
One of the craziest moments I think of my entire life was my first day of onboarding at Red Bull. And I was sitting with one of the culture marketing guys, and he was explaining to me the concept of opinion leader, which Red Bull, internally uses that phrase all the time to basically just denote, like, yeah, this person like knows the deal and they're a great contact to have in your market. Like, pretty straightforward. But for me, not having worked in a company like that before, the idea that like I had a label that I didn't know about really like shook me up a little bit. Like, "What, you called me an opinion leader? Like what?"
I
But you just start to
thought I was an
understand that.
athlete.
Yeah. Well, and it's also like, well, this is just like internal shorthand that we use to like denote that you are valuable to us in a meaningful way. But like when the light bulb goes on and you're like, "Oh, that's how it's done." Okay. But then I could talk to my friends and be like, "Hey, so here's the deal. Like, be friends with this guy, do this thing, say this. Like, these are the phrases you want to say if you want to get this thing to happen." And even Dylan has benefited from that, of me being like, "Hey, when you talk to your new Red Bull athlete manager, make sure to ask for this." It's
Behind the scenes, I want to see the course.
the double secret handshake.
Awesome. I think that actually really leads nicely into the brandscape and what's happening there, because a lot of times, um, when we start to think about how people are engaging with brands, they're looking for ways to differentiate, and bringing those athletes can be those ways to differentiate. But I think there's going to be an interesting challenge for brands, because there is such an influx in different brands at the moment, where you've got trail running brands currently that are in that landscape. You've got road running brands that are trying to move across and be in trail running. You've got outdoor brands that are trying to also be in trail running. And then you've got new brands that are also coming in that haven't existed. And think of Normal or Satisfy, etc. And it's creating a very crowded landscape. And I'm just going to read for you very quickly if we go through the top 5 male and female finishers, all of the brands that were represented. There was Nike, Brooks, Normal, On, North Face, Adidas, Hoka, then Salomon, Adidas, Salomon are the top 10 brands. And if there isn't consistency the way you see it typically in road, where there's like one brand that's dominating, you're seeing a lot of different brands cross that line. And so I think there's going to be potentially some attrition, and where we're going to see it is brands are going to probably come in. Many brands are going to come in and try to replicate what already exists, and they're the ones that I probably worry about the most, because there's just a sea of opportunity, a sea of sameness out there with the same shoes. Those brands that are going to innovate are going to be the ones that differentiate, and they're going to be the ones that win. And so I would watch for brands innovating in the space to make runners either better, faster, etc. And that's really going to be help those brands again stand out from everybody else.
Here's a question. What do you think is the differentiating factor besides innovation that's going to put a brand or be a make or break? Is it going to be, sales, marketing, distribution, product design? Like what do you think is going to be the factor that helps a brand hang on in this next phase where, everybody's jumping in right now, but what's going to be the thing that allows them to stay in trail running? Any
Hmm.
ideas?
Hmm.
Or
Do you,
maybe it's not even one of those things. I don't know. I just so curious to see what we think is going to make them stick around.
if I was to put my old Nike hat back on, it's not about one thing, it's about all the things. You've got to have the right product at the right place at the right time. And you've got to be able to market it in the right way to connect with consumers with the right athletes. It's those that are going to probably put all of the pieces together like a puzzle, to be able to have that perspective, I think will work very well. If you can't put all the pieces together, it's going to be a harder road to travel, I think.
I wonder about the intentions of some of the brands that have come in. Like some have been with trail running for a really long time. Others maybe see the opportunity with trail running and saying like, "Oh, we're an outdoor brand already, or we're a running brand already. We should add this category in." And we've seen that also happen in the bike industry, where it's like, I guess gravel bikes are a
Yeah.
thing now. It's kind of like a road bike with fat tires. We got to make a gravel bike all of a sudden, but they don't have the same intention as maybe a brand that was born in gravel, for example. And I think maybe that over the next couple of years will become a little bit more obvious of like, hey, we're sticking around in trail because like we're trail runners. Like this is our thing versus like, yep, we saw the opportunity, we captured as much as we could, but this doesn't look like it's gonna do what we want it to do, so we're gonna divest. I think that'll be a really fascinating long-term play to just keep an eye on. I don't
Yeah.
know.
Yeah. I'm excited for TRE this year and next year to see what brands are bringing to the table.
It does sort of feel, and call me out if I'm wrong in this, but does it feel to you like everybody now has a trail running offering? Is there anybody on the sidelines?
That don't have it. Not that I can think of. I mean, there are a lot of people in that space, and what they're coming with is really a lot of uh, a lot of the same. It's a lot of trail super shoes, and we saw that happen with On as being a sponsor of TrailCon and sort of launching that product. We've got tuned cushioning, so I think there's what we saw at TRE is there's a lot of road shoes that are trying to move over to trail, but road is not trail. And so I think people are going to try to figure out what that is and what that looks like. Is it carbon plating? Is it fiberglass plating? Is it something else? And then the last thing I think we're going to see is a lot of activity specific um, footwear coming to the market. Like we've already seen it with gravel shoes being a good example of it. Like they need that thing that's sort of the in between of road and trail, and gravel's playing in that space. Or yep, the Vertex Speed from Arc'teryx being a more vertically oriented shoe that's great for sort of those rock scrambles to at speed. And you're going to see that specificity kind of happening in the space.
I mean, not to say that anybody's just copy pasting. Like we know Arc'teryx, for example, put a ton of research, a ton of time and development into this
That was
stuff, right?
another great podcast, by the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these brands where it can sometimes see like, oh, I mean, Arc'teryx isn't the example that I should be leading with here because they've been around for a while, and especially with trail and hike and stuff like that. But yeah, like brands that like just are starting to enter the space. It's not like they just copy pasted something and put their logo on. I mean, they have put a lot of research and effort and whatever. Everybody that's here is doing their thing and means to be here. But I just, yeah, it's going to be interesting to see all this stuff develop out and see, what are the levers that they pull? Who are the people that they pull in? What's the process that they go through to continue to build on what they've done? Because probably, gosh, I don't know, is the product the easy part or the hard part? What do you think?
It's both. I mean, product's never easy. Let's put it that way. Like it's not the easiest, but
So kudos to every brand that has made product because yeah, these all these shoes are meant to be just beaten down for hundreds and hundreds of miles, if not more. In not no, nobody runs the same set of trail for the entire time, right? Like you're going uphill, you're going downhill, you're traversing, it's rocky, it's rooty, it's wet, it's dry. It's not the road. And so every brand that's entering this space is basically a glutton for punishment, and their shoes are going to go through it a lot more than they did on the road. And the one benefit for all this is that they're probably going to learn a lot about footwear in general because their stuff is just going to be put through the ringer in a way that maybe road running wasn't doing to them. So it might help them come to the conclusion a lot faster of what they need to be doing with shoes across the entire line.
yeah. I wonder if we're going to ever get to the point where trail running will influence road running in terms of footwear. Could be
Yeah,
could be an
could be.
interesting one.
That'd be it.
All right, and the last thing we talked about was tariffs. I didn't expect this to be. I didn't think anybody was going to be actually interested in it. But this is actually when all the cameras came out and people started taking pictures of the slides. But we're at this really interesting liminal moment with tariffs where brands have known tariffs are coming. They have built their plans in order to sort of manage that. And yet we don't have them in full effect yet for consumers. So everybody talks about what brands are doing, and and I'm happy to dive into that if you want, but that's pretty well known. But I see very few reports on what the consumer is going to do. And so just some quick high level thoughts here is I think it's going to hit us a bit like a recessionary environment, and sort of have similar characteristics. And during those times, what you see is generally consumers look for brands that they trust. And so those are sort of authentic in the space, going back to those brands that are there. They're probably going to look for a product that lasts. They're looking for sort of a longer duration product because of the prices that they have, and that they have to manage that in sort of inflationary environment, that there always is a seeking of that when prices go up. And then we'll also see that consumers will probably bulk buy more now and sort of buy a couple pairs just to try to get ahead of any price increases, and then probably seek deals later, once the tariffs hit. And so I think that's a little bit of the changing behavior that we'll likely see in the coming months to years as
Can you
tariffs impact.
can you go into you mentioned before you had a little bit more thought on the brand side of things. What are brands doing? This is fascinating, like what consumers are doing, but brands obviously are having to deal with this right now.
Yeah.
So what are
So
you seeing?
likely what you're seeing now at the moment is that brands are pulling forward product probably as much as they can to just get stuff into the marketplace. And then in order to have a high return on investment, they're probably going to focus on fewer shoes and a smaller assortment, and really probably go deep in marketing with one shoe that will sell very well in order to make sure that the ROI is there, and not necessarily spread it across as many shoes as we've seen in the past. Additionally, what we're going to see is that inventories will likely be a bit lower than we've seen, where typically in the past you want to have more inventory than you sell. You don't make money on product you can't sell. That being said, if you have too much inventory, that's a pretty big punishing number to have that you're going to have to discount pretty heavily. And so you might see some out of stocks in sort of the retailers, in order to make sure that that inventory is at that right level, especially for some of the ones that are selling through really quickly, in terms of the key styles. And so those are some of the trends. I think the US brands are going to, or all brands are going to potentially look outside the US to find additional sources of growth. So whether that's Europe or China, et cetera. But US brands are going to have a very hard time going there because there is this anti US sentiment, because of the tariffs and the prices that are going to sort of, be hard for the US brands to overcome, where European or Chinese based brands will do probably, they don't have that same, weight on their shoulders when selling. So you're going to see them go to different markets, but certain brands will do better than others.
That's the idea of the emerging market, sell it where you made it in certain cases is probably really interesting to a lot of brands. And I've seen that in the bike world too. Some of the stuff I've been doing over Asia has been getting a lot of attention from brands because they're like, "Hey, this is somewhere we're trying to focus and you're over there already. Like, let's just do some stuff together there." I think we have a way deeper podcast discussion about my last trip to China
Yeah,
that
we should
we
do
need to
that. I
dig
want to
into.
hear.
But I think that's something that I'm noticing across all my conversations of brands really taking notice of some of the other stuff that I've been doing in emerging markets. Not necessarily to prepare for this situation because how could you ever? But yeah, they're starting to really think through how else can we get that growth? Where else can we move inventory? And what if we didn't have to ship it across the world and we could just focus on selling it essentially where we made it or at least nearby or to a country that didn't have high tariffs and stuff like that. So I think there's a really interesting opportunity out there for people who are living in emerging markets of how they might, really play a role in developing and helping those companies grow. Um, yeah, man, China when I was over there, so fascinating. And interestingly enough, Onta Sports, which is I think number 2 or number 3 in the world, owns a big chunk of Amer Sports. So, you saw Solomon stores everywhere, Arc'teryx. I went into a Valence, which is like Arc'teryx is like super high end. I went into a Valence retail shop while I was in China. I'd never seen one of those before in America, but over there, man, they're all over not the Valence stores weren't all over the place, but the Arc'teryx ones were. And interesting to see who's already figured it out. And obviously, they've got the in with the Onta relationship, but yeah, fascinating to see how this is going to play out and maybe rebalance the scales with some of these emerging markets. There are incredible athletes in all these countries, and maybe they're going to get opportunities now that the Americans have had in the past. Marketing resources shifting, opportunities, projects, media going to these other places to sort of highlight some of the new talent that's emerging in the emerging markets. It could actually be a really cool moment for the sport to become more international than it already is.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. All right.
Cool.
So those were the nine, that we had. That sort of, we touched again. This is just light touch on all of them, but, a few things to see and watch for, in the future.
Was there anything at TrailCon that really stood out to you, maybe outside of your own presentation or maybe something that you wanted to add to yours that you didn't get a chance to do? Any additional sort of plus ones?
Yeah, I think there were, the one thing that I didn't touch on that I think the trail running community still needs to do a better job of is diversity. Um, it's still, while some of the numbers that we saw is there's progress being made, there's still a huge long road to go, in order to create sort of that equal access, equal opportunity to be on the trails and feel comfortable on the trails. And I hope that's a mantle that everybody picks up, in order to create, as much as trail running has its own culture and community, it needs to be a culture and community of inclusion. And I think it wants to be that way. We just need to make it so.
Amazing. Thank you for all of this. As you know, we always wrap up every podcast with BPC, brand product content. As you're the guest, I'm going to let you go first. What
Yeah,
do you got?
sure. So while at TrailCon, I was just on LinkedIn for a minute, and I saw a couple posts from Wild Rye, which has been on the podcast, right?
Yep. Yeah, we had Cassie.
Yeah, Cassie there, and that they are funding uh, through
We
uh,
fund we fund her, right?
WeFunder. Yep, that's exactly it. And they have raised through the community of passionate people who are interested in the brand. I think it's over 600,000, which is a huge number, and there's a huge rally cry for people in the industry to help and support build that brand. And to me, that's such a it's such a great moment to see not only passion for a brand and a women's brand and a brand that's trying to again go back to that idea of inclusion and bringing people in and making that sure people feel comfortable, but it's also the rally cry that everybody has to help support and that people want to be there and support that, and that is just an amazing validation of the work that they've done, but also the opportunity that exists for women's sports apparel really stood out to me. So kudos to them. Congratulations.
Yeah.
That's a big vote of confidence for them.
They still have a little ways to go to reach their goal. I think their goal was $1.4 million. So they're at 644,121, but they've got some time to go. I'm going to put a link in the show notes because Cassie is going to do a webinar with Mel Strong, another alumni from the pod. And they're going to talk a little bit more about all that stuff. So we're going to put a link to the WeFunder in there, and we'll also put a link to that webinar where they're going to talk a little bit more. But I think what's really interesting about Wild Ride too, and you'll hear it in Cassie's podcast, is that this is a brand that's like established now. They've been around for a minute and they've established success. They've got good track record of success and they've been doing their thing now. And I think it's not like you're taking a flyer on like a first time company where they're about to launch it. A lot of the stuff we see on Kickstarter or any of these other platforms it's some of that, but this is like legit. And I have a feeling that Wild Ride is going to just be onwards and upwards from here. So it seems like kind of a cool opportunity to play a role in that. And I've never used a site like this, but I think it's so cool. You can invest, anywhere from $100 on up. And so even if just a token of support, you could have, a little chunk of Wild Ride. That's kind of
Yeah, a
cool.
little bit of ownership. Yeah.
I mean, we always say like, vote with your dollars. And usually that's, buying products and stuff from the brands that you like. But well, here's another way to do it. You can vote with your dollars in a different way. So um yeah, I'm really excited about where this is headed. And I feel like for them to have that level of resources to take the next step forward would be really exciting for the crew at Wild Rye. So definitely keep my eye on this one. We'll put all the links in here.
That's awesome. Aaron, how about you? What's your BPC?
Okay, while I was on my way out of Tahoe, I had to make two stops. First was at Taco Salisco, which is my favorite Mexican spot in Tahoe, in Truckee. It's like the ultimate go-to, and if you didn't go there while you were in Truckee, then you blew it. I'm sorry.
I blew it clearly.
uh, but then the reason I was going there is that I was picking up lunch to meet with my friend Roy Tuscany, who is the founder of the High Fives Foundation. And I'm wearing my High Fives Foundation hat here, the Adapt and Destroy. High Fives Foundation is a really special group of people. Basically, they help people who have had, life-changing injuries, usually like a spinal cord injury or TBI, and they help them kind of get back on the mountain, whether it's adaptive skiing, adaptive riding, e-bikes, whatever it is. And I'd actually never been to the High Fives office before, but that's where I went on my way out of Tahoe. And I got a chance to see the healing center that they have and how much work they do for people that are really kind of, putting it all back together after a life changing injury. And the depth and the thought and the energy that's going into getting people back on the mountain is just so inspiring. The people that are there, facilitating it, from the trainers to the therapists to the massage, like there's 10,000 square feet of just awesomeness in Truckee. That's the High Fives Foundation headquarters.
That's
And
amazing.
I've always been a big fan of Roy. He just has such a good energy. I've always been a big fan of High Fives Foundation, but then get a chance to like see that place in person, I was like working hard to hold it together. I was really affected in a meaningful way, just seeing like how much energy Roy and his team of, it's a pretty decent sized team now too. They put so much energy into just helping people out. And man, I just have so much respect for High Fives. So um, yeah, I guess that's brand of the
Yeah.
VPCs. But yeah, there's tons of amazing content and product wise, I guess I've got their hat, but just so much respect to anybody who puts energy into stuff like, helping other people out, foundations that do all this amazing work. I mean, there's a long list, but this one is one of my faves. So I got to shout out Roy and the High Fives Foundation.
I got to go check it
I got to
out.
get him on the
Sounds
pod too.
amazing. You should.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
they're great. Awesome. All right. Well, we did it. We had a chance to dig into all the insights. Thanks again for being on the pod. This is
Absolutely.
it's so helpful just to get a little bit more out of that cuz you get so much information pushed through on that one day and there's a lot of stuff coming at you fast and now to actually have a chance to sit down and really dig into the research and thought process that you put into your session. This has been great.
Yeah, it's been fun. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.